Caitlin Chambers. Hope you all have had a great week, and I'm excited to talk to you about my topic. I chose the Titanic and its unsinkable legacy. I feel like this is a very important topic because I'm not going to discuss about the Titanic and the events that occurred necessarily, but why it is still important 114 years after the wreckage. So I want to dive deep into this and discuss a couple of reasons why I feel like this is an important factor in today's time, even though this happened over a century ago. So first and foremost, there were 712 survivors on the ship. Each of those survivors have had a story. Each of those survivors have came back and retold what their experience was like on the Titanic, and each one of them had a little bit of a different story. And I feel like those stories made the events that occurred on the Titanic a little more personable. There were workers, there were families, there were mothers who lost their children, there were children who lost their mothers. And so all of us can relate to something on the Titanic or someone who was on the Titanic, whether it's a worker, a family member, somebody who was on there by mistake. We can all connect with them in some way. Meredith Delicio has an article she wrote in 2023 called "Why the Titanic Continues to Captivate More Than 100 Years After Its Sinking." And that's where she states there were 712 survivors and each one of them has a story. So those stories, I feel like, were very impactful to everybody as a society, whether it was 100 years ago or today, because we can take those stories and see ourselves in it in some way or form. Also, I want to talk about the historical impact of the Titanic. We see them in our history books. We know that the boat was out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We know it hit an iceberg. We know all of the important facts. However, have we taken a deep dive and looked inside of the boat to see why it was so important? The Titanic was considered very, very luxury, and cruise ships in general are luxury, but it was a new form at that time. So it was a large grasp to try to get onto the Titanic, whether it be as a worker, as somebody traveling from one place to the next, as somebody who just won it on the lottery. Everything was very, very, very luxurious, and you were very lucky to be on that boat, whether you were in first class or third class. So I think the value of the Titanic and the value of that ticket made it all the more special. The technology on the boat was completely new. Most people had not seen it before, and even if it was around, it wasn't very popular. So they were actually able to tell that there was a wreckage way before the boat and the survivors came back, which was exceptionally rare. Edgar B. Herwick and Miles McCall used an article to discuss back and forth with other reporters on how they felt with the Titanic, and one of the things that they said was one of the very first shipwrecks that we ever knew about before the survivors had even come back was the Titanic. So it had already hit the newspapers and was on the streets before all of these families had came back to where they were supposed to be, and everybody knew. So everything was widespread. Mass media was beginning to occur, so it made it all the more popular because something rare had happened and it was becoming more known throughout the world. So I thought that was very, very interesting. I didn't expect the technology to be that intensive to where everybody knew before the passengers came back from the boat. I also feel like generations tell different stories of the Titanic based on their experience. Great-grandmothers will tell where they were at when they heard about the news, and similar to events such as 9/11. I know some people will recall them being in school. I, for one, was at home. I was very little, and I do not remember much about it, but some remember it like it was yesterday because it was such an important event. So each person has a story, whether they were on the ship, off of the ship, heard about it in the newspaper. They were able to tell their experience and their feelings when they heard about this event. And I think that's very important because it has allowed them to pass this story down from generation to generation. YouTube videos take deep dives into this story all of the time, and some of it is hearsay, some of it is studied research, and these stories will continue on and on and on, and that will go from person to person and generation to generation. Documentaries are important, and even attractions. One of the reasons why I chose this topic is because I just came back from Pigeon Forge, and I was able to visit the Titanic Museum, which was very neat because it also gave me a personal connection to the boat, to an individual. You get a card with an individual passenger's name on it, and at the end you get to see if your person survived or didn't. And it's very humbling to see. I, for one, had a little girl, and I found out that she did not survive. So it was very disheartening, and I think that's another reason why people connect to the Titanic and try to keep its legacy alive. Even looking back on the Titan submarine and Ocean Gate, as some people would call it, these people were so invested and so involved that they were willing to risk their lives, and eventually did, unfortunately, just to get a glimpse of the wreckage of this boat. I think that is incredible when it comes to speaking of the volume of power that the Titanic and the idea of the Titanic has. James Cameron, for example, he was the director of the Titanic movie. He made the movie because he was so obsessed with the Titanic that he wanted to get a first-hand look at it himself, and he used the movie as kind of an outline to be able to go and experience the actual wreckage himself. I learned that a couple of weeks ago. I actually saw that on TikTok before I ever decided to use this as a topic, and I thought that was very interesting. It was in a documentary about him. So I think that's very important. People still use little itty-bitty ideas of the Titanic to keep it connected in today's time. I think that its history, its technology, the personal stories, the experiences, they make its overall legacy, and I don't think that the Titanic will ever be forgotten. So I feel like it's a great topic to discuss as to why the legacy of the Titanic is still viable today and hasn't went away. The Titanic is not only remembered for how it sank, but the memories that it survived the wreckage. And I think that anybody who is interested in technology or history can use the Titanic as a form of something to enjoy, of not entertainment, but to study or to learn more about, to think critically. I catch myself often just going online and watching documentaries to see how different the times were. Even being on a cruise ship not long ago, the whole reason we have muster drills on the cruise ship and accurate lifeboats and the color of the lifeboats all stemmed from the Titanic and how they did it differently. So everything can connect in one way or another, but to know that we use things now because of how something happened back then in 1914, I think that's very special. And I think that's very important as to why the Titanic's legacy is still impactful today. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I didn't ramble too much, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next presentation. Thank you.